Hey there. Today's tales are all about creatures, but not the ones you think. One ends with an unexpected hero. Another begins with a girl terrified of a myth made real. And the last? Let's just say it involves something no forest should hide. In one case, a parrot delivers justice with its beak. In another, a predator floats into the night sky. And deep in the Amazon, something with a human face stalks the woods. So, what exactly is watching from the shadows when no one's supposed to be there? On the night before Christmas in the year 2001, a 48-year-old man named Kevin Butler was in his kitchen in Dallas, Texas. He was making food to bring to a Christmas party happening the next day at a friend's house. While cooking, Kevin heard his friend Larry, who was often at his home, call out from somewhere in the house. Kevin didn't catch the words, but the tone made it sound urgent. Kevin answered that he'd be there soon, then rinsed his hands and headed down the hallway. But before he reached Larry, Kevin stopped. He heard two men outside. Sounded like they were drunk and standing in his yard. And the voices? They were familiar. Kevin rushed to the door and opened it. Sure enough, there were two people he recognized. Johnny Sarah, a former employee, and Daniel Torres, Johnny's half-brother. Even though he expected to see them, seeing them for real made him furious. Kevin and Johnny had been arguing publicly for months about money. Johnny had even tried forging a check to steal from him. Kevin looked them in the eyes and said, "Here to rob me again?" Johnny didn't reply. Instead, he lunged and punched Kevin in the face. Kevin was nearly knocked down. Before he could respond, both men tackled him, punched and kicked him, dragged him into the house, and shut the door. They kept attacking. Kevin struggled but couldn't break free. One of the men held him down while the other fetched an extension cord. They tied him up. Once he was completely restrained, they went to the kitchen, grabbed knives, and started stabbing him repeatedly. Down the hall, Larry heard everything. The voices, the fight, the screams for help. Terrified at first, Larry finally ran toward the chaos and saw Daniel still stabbing Kevin. Larry charged. He had no weapon and little chance, but he did everything he could. Biting, scratching, trying to stop the attack. It wasn't enough. Daniel overpowered him. Soon, both Johnny and Daniel were stabbing Larry too. Kevin and Larry died from their injuries. Johnny and Daniel fled the scene, but they didn't realize they'd made a critical mistake. Because while Larry died, he also ensured they would be caught. Larry, it turned out, wasn't a person. He was Kevin's pet cockatoo. Named after the basketball player Larry Bird, Kevin had adopted him 2 years earlier. They were inseparable. So when the bird heard Kevin screaming, he flew into the fight. He clawed and pecked Daniel's head, getting blood on his beak. That blood was used by investigators to identify Daniel. The two brothers were arrested and later sentenced to life in prison for murder. At 6:30 in the evening on July 29th, 2023, a 15-year-old girl named Talia de la Diaz stood just outside the back door of her home. She was staring into the thick, shadowy rainforest that bordered her backyard. Her village, deep in the Amazon jungle of Peru, was tiny and isolated. As she looked out, she would have seen towering trees and heard the calls of monkeys and exotic birds. The air was heavy and wet. But none of that was on her mind. Talia's focus was locked on a grapefruit tree just a few steps from her house. She wanted to grab a fruit to make juice for her family, but she was hesitating because she was scared. There were two reasons. First, this was the Amazon. Even in daylight, it was a place full of danger. Snakes, big cats, it was all out there. But the second reason was worse. In the past few weeks, people in her village claimed they had seen shadowy beings hiding in the trees. The beings had glowing green eyes and seemed to watch the villagers from a distance, like hunters. Some people said these were pelicaras. The word means face peelers. According to local belief, these were outsiders who kidnapped locals, slit their throats, peeled the skin from their faces, and sold their body fat on the black market. The fear ran so deep that villagers began doing nightly patrols to protect each other. Talia was scared, but also trying to stay logical. She had gone to that tree many times before. It was close. and patrols were active. She looked around once more. No sounds, no movement. She took a breath and dashed to the tree. She picked a grapefruit. But when she turned to head back, she froze. Standing between her and her house were two large, dark shapes. One of them was so tall it looked like part of the trees. Their eyes shone an unnatural green. They stared right at her. Talia was frozen with fear, staring back. As she focused, she saw their faces were stretched in an odd, unnatural way, like they were wearing masks. Then, without warning, the tallest figure moved, floating instead of walking, straight toward her. Before she could run, the figures grabbed her and slammed her to the ground. One of them covered her mouth and nose, cutting off her air. The other one raised what looked like a utility knife or a box cutter and placed it against her throat. And in that moment, Talia understood. These were Pelikaras. She was about to be killed. But something inside her snapped. She thrashed and fought, managing to push one of them away. The hand left her face and she screamed. From somewhere nearby, voices shouted back. Footsteps pounded. The night patrol was coming. The attackers let go. Talia got to her feet and sprinted toward the house. One of the patrollers raised a gun and fired at the dark shapes. Talia looked back, expecting to see the attackers running. But they weren't running. They were floating. The figures were now hovering in midair above the jungle, glowing green eyes staring down at her and the patrol. Bullets flew, but the figures kept drifting upward into the sky. And then, they were gone. Talia wasn't physically harmed, but mentally she was wrecked. So was the rest of her village, especially those who saw it happen. The fear after that night was overwhelming. Eventually, the government stepped in. They launched an investigation and came to a surprising conclusion. There was an illegal mining camp deep in the jungle. To keep people away, some miners used jetpacks, armor, and masks to stage attacks and impersonate creatures, then used the jetpacks to escape. That's the official story. But people like Talia, and others in the rainforest who've seen the same green-eyed beings, don't buy it. They say those weren't miners. They say they were Pelikaras, or something not of this world. On the afternoon of May 21st, 1974, a 39-year-old man named Paulo Gomez made his way through the woods in Argentina. In one hand he carried a machete, in the other an axe. As he moved through the trees, he used the machete to slice through brush. Eventually, he stopped in front of a massive tree. He set the machete down, took hold of the axe, and got ready to chop it down. But before he could strike, he looked up and saw something strange. There were deep claw marks scored into the tree bark high above his head. At first, he assumed it was a bear. But the longer he stared, the more he realized how huge the animal must have been to leave marks like that. The gouges were wide, long, and deep. Polar wasn't just any man in the woods. He was a professional lumberjack who owned that section of forest. His cabin was only a few yards away. He was used to wildlife. Bears didn't frighten him. He lived alone. No neighbors for miles, no phone, no car. Totally self-sufficient. His family thought he was crazy for living like that. But they also had another reason to be concerned. There was an old legend about that forest. People said enormous, unnatural creatures stalked the woods and hunted people. Polar didn't believe in any of it, just stories. So he put the axe to work. The tree eventually crashed to the ground with a thunderous boom, and in the same instant, just behind him, Polar heard a low growl. It was deep, aggressive, close, like some huge animal was right behind him. He spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. Just trees. Stillness. Nothing else. He stood still for a moment, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. Was the growl just the tree crashing down? Was he spooking himself because of those claw marks? Maybe he was just overthinking it. He tried to shake it off and got back to work, breaking the tree into smaller pieces. Over the next few hours, he carried the wood to his cabin and stacked it into a large pile. By the time he finished, the sun had dipped and the sky was going dark. His stomach growled. Time for dinner. Polar liked eating outside, listening to the insects and feeling the warm air. He scooped some leftover stew from the night before and headed out to a table near his cabin. A few feet beyond that was his outdoor stove. He fired it up, put the stew on to warm, then sat at the table and waited. But soon, something felt off. It was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no forest sounds, only the soft hiss of the stove. He looked around. Total silence. And Pola knew exactly what that meant. Something big was nearby. His thoughts returned to the claw marks, to the growl. Maybe a bear had come back. He scanned the trees, eyes darting, trying to spot movement. Still nothing. But a chill ran down his spine. He decided he'd better eat inside. He stood and moved toward his cabin door. But then he remembered. The stew. It was still on the stove. He glanced once more into the still, dark forest, saw no movement, and quickly walked over to shut off the heat and grab the pot. That's when something hit him from behind. Hard. He gasped, all the air knocked out of him. Then he looked down. A thick, furry arm had wrapped around his body, tipped with sharp claws. It yanked at his torso. He instantly thought, it's the bear. He twisted and struggled. Somehow he broke free and stumbled to the ground. He spotted his machete near the stove, dove for it, and spun around to defend himself. But the thing standing there wasn't a bear. It was covered in dark hair. It had claws. It was huge, but its face was human. Without thinking, Polar turned and bolted. He sprinted toward the lumber pile next to his cabin, trying to put distance between him and the creature. As he scrambled over the stacked wood, he heard pounding footsteps behind him, and then something slammed into the side of his head, hard. But adrenaline kept him going. He made it to the roof of his cabin and climbed up. Blood streamed from his head, but he turned, ready to fight, and the thing was gone. The forest was silent again. He stayed on the roof the entire night, gripping the machete, eyes on the tree line. Nothing returned. When dawn broke, he finally reached up to check his injury. His ear was gone. The creature had ripped it clean off. Still bleeding, dizzy from blood loss, Polar climbed down and ran a mile to a woodworking shop. The workers there saw him and didn't ask questions. They just got him in a car and rushed him to a hospital. Once he was stable, police arrived to hear his account. He told them everything: the claw marks, the growl, the attack. He described the creature, its size, its claws, the human-like face. The officer taking notes stopped writing when Polar said, "human face." "That couldn't be right," the officer said. "Bears don't look like people." But Polar stood by what he said. He knew what he saw. The case was closed as a regular bear attack. But that wasn't the end. After Polar's story came out, at least 30 others reported seeing, or being attacked by, a similar creature in that same forest. A creature that walked like a bear, but had a human face. Locals gave it a name, the Ukamar. To this day, no one knows what it really is.